Welcome, everyone, to this month's episode of Recovery Rockstar. My name is Melinda. I am a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is that I've not had to use a mood or mind-altering substance since December 28, 2011. I continue to have tons of gratitude in my heart for those who went before me and showed me the way, so I could have a life full of love, joy, peace, and more than anything, being of service to my fellows. I am super excited because today is September 2nd, which is also the second day of Recovery Month. So being Recovery Month, I encourage people to go to the Recovery Vermont website and look at all of the different activities happening in the state of Vermont so we can raise awareness that recovery works, that people do recover, and to share hope as well as information and education for people who are still looking for their recovery path. I also want to highlight the use of Narcan, also known as naloxone overdose kits. I will once again say it's better to have a kit and never need it than to need a kit and not have it. They are readily available and so easy to access. You can look at the health department's website to find a pilot site location near you. So I am super excited because last month I interviewed 4 guests. We had an hour-long show. It was a special show, and they highlighted the Recovery Challenge. So I encourage people to go back and watch that episode because the press release did come out yesterday, and the Recovery Challenge is happening this month. It's going to be an amazing event, and hopefully it's going to be an annual event. So I am going to introduce my guest today. I feel my heart even shudder because I remember watching this individual over the years and just seeing so much growth and strength, and somebody I admire. I am so grateful that she was willing to come and be on the show today. So I want to welcome Hope Love. And I just thank you so much for coming on the show, Hope. I know that our paths have crossed throughout the years many different times. And I know for me, when I reflect on it and see for both of us the growth that's happened, it's really astonishing. So I'm just going to start by saying welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I was thinking on the way up here how it had been a few years since I'd seen you, and I was really happy and honored when you reached out to me and asked me to be on the show. So thanks.
Absolutely, and I'm grateful that you said yes. So what I'd love to do is just start talking about first a little bit about what your life was like as a young person.
Sure. So I grew up in Burlington here in Vermont. I think right out the gate, my journey was destined to be the way it was because of my parents. My mother was and is a active alcoholic and drug addict, and my father was an active alcoholic. My father wasn't around, and I was raised by my mother, and it was just a pretty chaotic and dysfunctional childhood. My mom was consistently using and selling drugs. I witnessed a lot of domestic violence and abuse. Growing up, I don't ever remember my mother saying she loved me. It was really difficult, and I was really open with my grandparents, my mother's parents, about the abuse that was happening at home. And so when I was in 4th grade, I went into the custody of DCF and went to live with my grandparents, and they provided a lot of stability and love. They weren't active users. But like the first 4 years of a child's life are critical in developing who they are, how they think and feel and act. And because I had such a dysfunctional childhood, I just struggled as a young woman, as a teenager. And so when I was 18, after my grandfather died of cancer, I did not know how to deal with it. And I was heartbroken because my mom was not having anything to do with me. And I met a young woman, and she introduced me to drugs and alcohol.
Right.
And then it all went downhill from there for about 20 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And gosh, it feels like such a familiar story in a sense that we get to an age that we experiment with it, and it's that aha moment. Like, wow, this is what I have been looking for, and I want more.
Yeah. I remember when I was a teenager being really self-conscious and self-critical, not feeling connected to myself, not really knowing who I was, and not feeling connected to other people. I hear a lot when I hear other people's stories where they will talk about how when they were younger, they were constantly shifting their persona of who they were to fit in, and that's how I was. And I always just had an intense amount of anxiety. My mind was always racing, the thoughts. And that first time that I used alcohol, it just went quiet.
So you had a moment of peace.
Yeah, that first time. And I wanted more of it.
Yeah. And that's such a common thing that I hear as well. Is I was speaking with somebody yesterday, and the racing minds of many people that struggle with use. And I know for me, even in today's world, being somebody in recovery, my brain has already lived out the next 10 years within 30 seconds of waking up. My eyes aren't open and my brain is already 100 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. And that was the way that it was before I even touched a substance.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of times we've got the racing thoughts, and it can be a benefit, right? If we put, as my sister used to say, if only you could use your powers for good. And when we put that energy in something to focus on the better good, the stuff that can happen is just mind-boggling. Mm-hmm. So for you, it sounds like you got that introduction around 18-ish. And then when did you start identifying that maybe there was a problem?
I would say probably 5 years later. So, I was 18, dropped out of high school, started experimenting with other drugs. I met a man and got married when I was like 20. And we had 3 children together by the time I was 23. I had twins and a little boy. And during the time that I was parenting, I was actively using. I mean, I'm able to sit back and reflect on who I was as an individual at that time. And I did not care for those children in the way that I needed to. So in those 5 years, my use progressed. I was using heroin and crack cocaine. I left the relationship. He was the father of the kids, continued to use, and then I started interstate drug trafficking while parenting 3 young children. I didn't have any heat in my home. I was heating my house with an open oven. I was like trash piling up on the porch. It was awful. I was basically living in a condemned house, you know what I mean, and trying to take care of 3 kids. And somebody was concerned and called DCF, much like they had done when I was a kid to my mom. And DCF came a few times. I was able, I'm really creative and able to lie and manipulate and create a reality that I want others to see. And I was able to do that a few times with DCF. And then they came to my house one day and wanted to urine screen me. So this was back when they could UA you in your home, the worker would. And I'm sitting in the bathroom, my little girl's on the floor, DCF sitting in front of me. And I know that I'm going to test positive for opiates and cocaine. And I just had this moment of clarity where I was like, you're doing the same thing to your kids that your mother did to you. Right. And I had never realized that before. And I did not want them to have the same outcome that I did, because that's what would have happened. And so I told the DCF worker that I had a significant substance use issue and I couldn't do it. And the kids went with her that day. So that was that moment where whatever, the universe, something opened my eyes to see that I was potentially destroying another human's outcome in life. And so they went into custody, and one would think when your kids go into custody, you get it together. And how can I get it together if I don't know how to get it together? If I knew, I wouldn't have been in that position anyway. And so my use progressed. I lost my housing because my children were gone. I lost money. I didn't get reach up anymore. So I was living on the streets. And my use was just out of control. And I got pregnant with my son, LeBron, who's going to be 16, and he saved my life. Mm-hmm. When I was pregnant with him, I realized that I could not take the same path that I had with the other children. And so, at the time that I got pregnant, I was living in a hotel in the middle of winter, working for $40 a day at Labor Ready, just really struggling. And so I made a decision to go to Lund, which is a residential treatment program for women. I had known about it because my sister went there. And so I went. And I got sober, and I say it in quotes because at the time I thought I was just a drug addict and that I wasn't an alcoholic. And so I got sober, and I left that program and started a path of recovery, although filled with many potholes and challenges over the last 16 years. That's where it kind of began for me.
Wow. And it's amazing because I haven't had a chance to hear your journey, and yet I knew that you've worked for Lund before too.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the data, and even in, you know, some big books and statistics that say that people who are in recovery have the earning potential above average, who are overachievers. And once again, shifting because of that experience and the resilience that you gained from having to live that life until you got recovery, it gives you an additional strength. So it's just interesting as a community partner with you too, that I've watched you and identified you as somebody who's a super strength in the field. And of course, it took time for me to learn that this is why, you know, she has that it factor. There's got to be more to the story. And it's just so amazing to me and beautiful that you've used that experience, and in turn, you've helped so many people in similar situations. So once you got in recovery, and I did see the quotations, so recovery from drugs, what did your world look like?
So things, you know, and over the 16 years that I was sober, a lot of good things happened. You know, I was probably about a year sober, and I got a job at the Act One Bridge program. There, I never envisioned my life would be the way it is now. I had no plan to be a therapist in private practice, supporting people in recovery. I don't even know what I wanted to do. So I got by chance, I happened to get a job there. And I worked at the Act One Bridge program for 3 years. You know, I had my son LeBron, and then his father and I had another child, Deshaun. So I had 2 children during that time. And I do want to say that I had relinquished my parental rights on the other 3 children, and they were adopted, which isn't, one of the interesting things is the twins were adopted by other women in recovery.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. And I have a relationship with my daughters now. They're 21. But anyway, so I worked at the Act One Bridge program. I started college at CCV. And then I transferred to UVM and got my bachelor's degree in social work. And then I went to work for Lund. And I was not the first person they wanted to hire. They were actually scared of me and didn't want to hire me because, you know, I grew up on the streets. I was a pretty rough, aggressive young woman, right, probably until 3 years ago when I actually got sober and in recovery. But they ended up offering me the job because people didn't accept it. You know, that was the universe's plan. Thank you. Yeah. And I worked there for 11 years. And I really did have an amazing career. I was a part of a project with so I worked as a substance abuse case manager, working with mostly women who were newly in recovery and supporting them with accessing housing and jobs. And then I transferred over. It's just funny how the universe works. Like, everything comes together. I ended up being a case manager at the DCF office in St. Albans. So I went to work for an agency that I got sober through. I went to work and partner with an agency that was a critical part of my life that ended up having my children, you know, helping my children get adopted. And I was in DCF custody for a short period of time. So it just all came together. So I got to be a part of this program in establishing substance abuse case managers at the DCF offices across the state. Yeah, and then I became a therapist working in the DCF office with parents. You know, when there were concerns a parent was abusing or neglecting their child because of substance use, I would complete these assessments to help them get supports, you know, so that they could be sober and in recovery and get DCF out of their lives. Interestingly enough, I was drinking at the same time.
Right.
Because I always thought it was the substance that identified me as, was the issue, or identified me as the addict or alcoholic. Right. So I always thought, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict. What I've come to learn is it doesn't matter what I put in my body, it is the intention behind it and the reason for it. Mm-hmm. And when I honestly look back, I always struggled with alcohol use. I mean, that was the first thing I did. So as a substance abuse case manager and a therapist, I was actively drinking. I did have a period of sobriety from alcohol when I worked at Act One. There were 2 young men who were a part of a 12-step program. who I kind of had crushes on, and they asked me to go to this anniversary meeting for one of these 12-step meetings, and I went to like impress them. I was in no shape or form trying to figure out if I was an alcoholic or not. And there was a young man from Boston speaking his story, and although we were different ages, different genders, from different locations, and had different really experiences in life, when he talked about his alcohol use and how he felt when drinking, I could relate to.
Right.
And I left that meeting and I called one of the young men who had invited me and I said, I'm an alcoholic and I need to get help. And I just broke down crying. So he hooked me up with a woman and I worked the 12 steps and had 18 months of sobriety. This was over 10 years ago. But two of the things that I didn't do during that time was that I wasn't completely honest in my 12-step work. And I did not work on developing my spiritual identity. So for me, spirituality is like, how am I connected to myself internally? Mm-hmm. How do I think and feel about myself? How do I relate to myself? And then how do I relate to others and connect with others? And what is my purpose in life? I think about when I was actively using, it's kind of like a hamster wheel. You get up, do your thing, go to bed. Like, get up, do your thing, go to bed. No real, goals or drive. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have any purpose either. And I relapsed. And so I was out for 10 years until 3 years ago. And then 3 years ago, I know I'm just talking and this isn't
it's
a doc.
All good. It's all good. I just love it.
So here I am, a therapist. Somehow I convinced myself to drink again and that I didn't have a problem. So I'm a substance abuse professional working with other people. And I want to say that doesn't take away from the work that I did.
Right.
Right. Because I can be a mental health counselor and have anxiety or depression. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I shouldn't do the work.
Exactly.
So I was doing some meaningful work, but I was miserable because I was actively using. And it was negatively affecting my life. There were many times that I missed work because I was hungover. I would go to work hungover. I've driven under the influence with my children in the car, all the things that we do that we're not proud of. And 3 years ago, July 21st of 2018, I don't really remember what happened, but I woke up that morning and I could see the trajectory of where my life was going. Here I am, a substance abuse professional, really seen as a content expert throughout the state for the intersection of addiction and child protection. And I'm speaking at conferences and working with the, drug task force and teaching with them. And I have all these great things. I have my children, I have my own home, and I could see it just going away if I kept drinking. So I went to a 12-step meeting and I immediately got a sponsor and started working the steps. And I did it in an honest and meaningful way. And my life, the last 3 years, is just completely beautiful.
I have watched you in the last 3 years, and I remember when I first saw you in the rooms of recovery, and it was I can't describe it except to say, because I didn't know your past, your journey, but what I did know is when I saw you there and your commitment and the glow that came with it, it's she is going to be amazing at this. And I've watched with, I remember, I think the first time I actually saw you, we were at UFAI. I was with my sister at doing the Muay Thai and CrossFit and all this
That's
stuff.
where I relapsed on alcohol. It was that time. Yeah, after a fight.
And see, and I was, I wasn't in successful recovery at that point either. Mm-hmm. So it's just interesting how our paths had crossed then. And then later on, being in recovery and the work that we do, because of course that intersected regularly and we worked very closely together. And then when you had gotten in the rooms, because I had that idea, I knew that you were in recovery to some degree, but when you had said that the alcohol, was still a factor. And again, I was just speaking with somebody the other day that we trade seats on the Titanic, right? For me, it was marijuana, and then, that made me too lazy and I was getting fat. So then I had alcohol, and then, I got too many DWs. So, pills don't smell, and heroin's cheaper, so we trade it all up. But the reality is we can abuse anything, food, money, exercise, you name it. And when I look at what you have been doing with your life since you got in recovery from alcohol as well, it's baffling to me. And I know you shared some photos with us, so those will be shown as well. And quite frankly, the before fit picture, we were working together during that time, and I still thought you looked great.
That's
so
when I
didn't
was
think it
actively using, alcohol.
Yeah, so it's like, just to say, who would have ever known? And yet, all of the stuff that you've done. So, as we're, in the last, few minutes of our show, tell me a little bit about what your life is like today, and maybe a little bit about some recent endeavors that you have done.
Yeah. So, just to touch on, like, as far as my recovery, I've had 3 years. I just celebrated 3 years of complete abstinence, and I am in recovery. I am an active member of a 12-step program. I worked the steps. I support other people in the process. And one of the gifts that I've been given is that for 20 years, I consistently thought about wanting to use something to dull the edges, to make me feel comfortable internally. And to have 3 years where that, I couldn't go a week before. And to go 3 years, it still blows my mind every day. It's really a gift. And I've had some painful and uncomfortable things happen in the last 3 years, and not once did I think about using. It's crazy, and I just think about all those years that I struggled, unnecessarily maybe, but to my benefit, because I wouldn't be where I am now. And then last year, in August, I just celebrated a year of being in private practice. So I'm a therapist in private practice in South Burlington. It's flourishing. I have more clients than I know what to do with, and I love it. I work like 40 hours a week, back-to-back sessions with clients. And to have those connections with other people in recovery is really nice. I'm really transparent about my story and my experience with the clients that I work with, and I think they appreciate that authenticity. I have a relationship with a wonderful human being who's not in the rooms or has never struggled in the way I have, and he loves me unconditionally. And he has to deal with a lot of nonsense because I'm still who I am, and I've had a life that has influenced how I think and feel still. Right. We recently got engaged. Yes.
I didn't know
Yes.
that.
It was so
sweet.
He's an amazing human being. I love him to death. I never thought that I could find somebody who would love me in the most purest way possible. So I feel really grateful. Wow. And then when I was still drinking, I had started weightlifting. So you'll show the before and after photo I have. The before photo was before I started weightlifting. I was extremely overweight. I wasn't taking care of myself. Alcohol is not good for you, shocker.
Yeah.
I don't know if people know this or not, but it really is, and it's poison. So I was extremely overweight, and I started lifting weights, but really struggling in the gym because I would be hungover and would miss workouts or not eat my meal plan. So about a year and a half ago, I made a decision to get into competitive bodybuilding. And I followed a meal plan and a training plan 100%. I got connected with a coach at Synergy Fitness, which is in Williston, who happens to be in recovery, a woman in recovery.
Gosh, I didn't realize she was in recovery too.
Yeah, and she's just phenomenal. So she helped coach me for the last year and a half, and then on August 14th, I competed in my first bodybuilding competition as a women's physique competitor, and I won first place.
I saw that.
I know. I was so amazed. The only plan was to get on stage. That was it. There was nothing else. I wasn't trying to win. So I won that competition, and now I'm working with a new coach because the goal is to be a pro bodybuilder. Okay. Because I won the Vermont Championships, I can compete at the national level. And if I win a national level show, then I'll go pro. So I'm working with a new coach out of Massachusetts who's preparing me to compete in the spring of next year. I'm going to do 2 amateur shows to get some more experience, even though I don't need to do an amateur show necessarily. And then I'm going to compete at a national level show. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is all my life people told me there were things I couldn't do.
Right.
I was a poor kid who grew up in the bad part of Burlington, and I was never going to be anything. My mother told me, you will never be nothing.
Right.
And then I was a young woman struggling, and I was an addict, and people looked at me and judged me and thought I was going to be nothing. And I became something. I was something all along.
Absolutely.
But went through college. I started a career. You know, my goal now is to compete at the Olympia. As crazy as that sounds, people might think I can't do it, and I'm going to do it. You know?
I know you're going to do it. I know you're going to do it.
My butt is going to make it there, you know? And like, I recently read in this book about trauma that resiliency is taking adversity and transforming it into purpose. Exactly. And so everything that I've gone through, I've used it. Now I see that I use it for a purpose. Like my experience in recovery as a therapist, you know, I use bodybuilding to support me with my own mental health and like working through stuff, you know, so if someone can do that, there's nothing they can't achieve. And I really believe that because I see it happening in my own life. So
I just love it. It's such a perfect example of using your experiences to motivate you in your future. And I'm a big Joyce Meyer fan, and one of her sayings is about, you know, we look at our past, and the goal is to not regret it and shut the door on it, but to learn from it, right? And I know in my world now, we never lose. We win or we learn something, we never lose. And with Joyce Meyer, she used to say, you use your past as a springboard, not a hammock, because it's so easy to get lost in it. And yet, if we can reflect, just like I've seen you do so beautifully today on those experiences are what gave you the springboard to move forward in your future. And I'm just so blessed to have chatted with you today, that you were willing to come on the show. And as we sadly close out, because, you know, there's a number of people I feel like, gosh, we could sit here and do a 5-hour show. And I know you're one of those people that we could do a long show, but we are at the end. So if you have any just quick, you know, 20-second, 30-second one-liner that you would send to people, or a nugget that you'd send to people.
I know these questions always get me because it puts me on the spot. I don't know. You can do it. No, I'm not. You know, I'm just going to say it, and as ridiculous as it sounds, Nike has the best saying ever. Okay? Just do it. And that's the perspective I have. Everything that's difficult, I just do it. And whatever. That's all. That's what I have.
I love it. Simple. You didn't overcomplicate it. Thank you.
Just do it. So you never know what will happen if you don't try.
Exactly.
You won't, ever.
Well, thank you so much, Hope. I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate everybody for watching. Again, friendly reminder, we are in Recovery Month. Look at the Recovery Vermont website to look at the different activities that are going on near you. There are activities all across the state of Vermont. Also encourage you to look at the Vermont Recovery Network website to look for a recovery center in your area. There are 12 across the state. More than anything, just to remind people that anyone can recover. It doesn't matter what your circumstances look like. You can recover. All you have to do is reach out and ask for help. And thank God there's so many options these days. So thank you all for watching. We will see you next time on Recovery Rockstar.